There's a reason why even some of the greatest guns ever made never get as popular as the AR-15 or the AK-47. And today, on PLISKIN'S Picks, the gun we're talking about is the perfect example of this. I'm Pliskin, let's get right on into it. Now, the SIG550 story starts at around 1978, when the Swiss wanted to switch from their current battle rifle, designated the SIG557, to a more modern, lightweight, and intermediate cartridge rifle. By the 1980s, production began on a rifle that took the layout of the AK's long-stroke gas piston system and modified it to be more modular, have superior ergonomics to the AK, and be significantly lighter, while adopting the standard NATO 556 by 45mm cartridge. By 1990, the first variant of this rifle, the SIG550, was adopted by the Swiss military. The SIG550 and many of its later variants have a lot of desirable traits. For example, they come with folding stocks, they use the reliable long-stroke gas piston system, they feature the reciprocating right-sided charging handle of the AK, which may seem like a complaint to some, as for some of the reloads you might have to reach over the gun and manipulate it in certain ways. However, many of these variants come with a bolt release, so instead of having to actually reach over like you would with your AK to charge the charging handle, all you need to do is hit the button on the left side when the bolt locks back and it sends itself right into battery. So the only real issue some people could have with this is just if you're one of those guys that have an issue with reciprocating charging handles, as having that mass move back and forth does contribute to a little more felt recoil. It's to be expected, since this gun takes so many features from the AK, that it would come with a paddle release for its magazines. What wasn't expected at the time of its release was how the proprietary magazines that came with the SIG550s and later variants have a feature in which they can interlock with one another, allowing you to change magazines and reload significantly faster than if you had to grab a magazine out from a chest rig or something like that. Now, this probably came from how back in the 80s and even into the 90s, a lot of guys, what they would do would be to tape magazines together so they could quickly switch them. SIG probably saw this and said, hey, why don't we just create a feature that allows them to interlock in a way that's a lot more ergonomically pleasing and practical. Although the most common ammunition variant would be the 556 caliber, there are variants made in 7.62 by 39. Older versions of this gun, such as the original SIG550, in terms of modifications, as were the standards at the time, would only really work with proprietary attachments, in this case a SIG grenade launcher and bayonet lug. However, the more modern variants, such as the SIG 552 and 553, can be fitted with Picatinny rail systems, which allow you to put whatever attachments you want onto the guns. In this regard, they have aged quite nicely, as they can be integrated with modern-day optics, and the barrel length can be suited to modern standards for what you'd expect out of a carbine rifle. With that being said, the heaviest variant of the gun is the 550 sniper variant, which comes with a 25.6-inch barrel and weighs a whopping 15.5 pounds. Now, on the other hand, the lightest variant would either be the SIG 552 or 553, both of which come with an 8.9-inch barrel and weigh around 7.1 pounds. One of the first places that I really saw this firearm in a recognizable fashion would have been in Far Cry's 3 and 4, in which they feature the modernized SIG 553. It's an early game weapon outclassed by the default AK in both games. It does low damage and tends to have higher recoil. The only real reason to use this is the fact that you can slap on a red dot attachment, which gives you slightly better accuracy than the default AK in the game. However, it's not really worth it. It would be an extremely realistically practical rifle to carry in both the Rook Islands or Kirat, because it's light, reliable, and customizable with those pick rails. However, the games failed to really capitalize on how much you could customize this lightweight carbine. Another place where I was dumbfounded as I saw an ambiguously black rifle that wasn't quite AK or AR-15 was in Uncharted 4. This game features the civilian 556 model, which normally would only come in semi-automatic. However, since it's a game and they want it to be balanced as a full auto rifle, it fills in as the standard assault rifle for late game enemies. It is a little kind of weird along with a lot of the guns in Uncharted 4 in the sense that they're mostly modeled really realistically, but for some reasons there's these strange kind of Franken-gun features. In the case of the 556 featured in game, it features a Scorpion EVO A1 stock. Why? I'm not too sure. Still, this is a solid representation for a rifle that would be reliable and rugged enough to be something that mercenaries would use practically and seriously. Also, even though it features some inaccuracies with the anatomy of the rifle and features weird stocks and such things like that, I have to give props to Uncharted 4 for realism in the way that a lot of these rifles come integrated with a sling, which is, as of right now, one of the most practical ways to carry not just a rifle, but even a sniper or shotgun. Of course, the place where the modern gamer will recognize the SIG550 the most would probably be in Warzone, in which it is featured as the Grau. Now, back in October of 2020, I believe Season 4 of Warzone, this gun dominated the meta. Everyone would give it the long barrel variant and shred with this thing. It replaced the M4 as the high damage, low recoil, just laser beam weapon that you could slaughter everyone across the map with. And although it's nowhere near as dominant in the meta as it was back in 2020, this rifle is still prevalent and a fan favorite of a lot of people within, the Warzone community. Now, any of you that have seen a PLISKIN'S pick video in the past know that the main point of this series is to point out a weapon that I find interesting or like, and talk about why it's not as popular in practical usage, as well as its digital footprint. In terms of practical usage, you'll see this rifle around. It's sturdy, reliable, and although there are rifles that are definitely much more up to modern standards, like I said before, the SIG550, specifically the 52 and 53 Commando variants, have aged quite nicely. As rifles, at least intermediate cartridge rifles, are getting a lot more shorter and more compact, the Commando variants are well suited to how someone would set up their rifle nowadays. And again, the addition of Picatinny rail systems make them customizable, which is one of the most important features that any gun in the modern era, in the 21st century, can have. The reason why it's not as popular as, say, the AR or AK in practical usage is because the AR and AK are much more widely produced, whereas this is a high-end Swiss rifle. So because it's not as readily available or cheap to manufacture, or maybe it's just an issue with logistics, but the reason it's overshadowed is simply because it's outnumbered. Now, if we go over to the digital footprint, or why it's not so popular in pop culture, it comes down to one thing. This rifle is cool. It feels good to use in most games it's featured in. However, it looks way too generic and doesn't really come out in its own niche. So why would you feature the SIG550 in your game when you could instead feature a much more popular weapon like the two dominating rifles, or maybe, feature something that looks a little bit more unique, like the FAMAS or G36. That being said, this weapon is still phenomenal in real life as well as its entries in the games and movies that it has been featured in. And because it's aged so well, and I definitely feel has an interesting premise within the digital realm, I'd give this weapon an S rank, both in real life application, as it would be a practical rifle to trust your life to, and as well as being fun in the games it's featured. While it definitely has its shortcomings in games like Far Cry 3 and 4, its presence in Warzone, and the way it can be integrated into games like Uncharted so easily, really make it a cool rifle to see. Still, if it had more interesting or unique aesthetics, more people would probably know about this. But anyways, guys, what other games did I miss out that feature the SIG550 or one of its variants? Let me know down in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed. This has been PLISKIN. Over and out.